Hey guys, myself and Jordan find ourselves in San Francisco. We are here for the Samsung Galaxy S26 phone launch. We're here at a little sneak peek, and this is where we just get to kind of learn about the hardware, see some of the AI features, but I have very good news. This is going to be a review because we are going to get a reviewable copy. As usual, we like to look at the most advanced phone, so we'll be playing with the S26 Ultra. We're going to test it as a camera as usual. I've got a lot to do. Let's get to it. I'm Chris Nichols. This is PetaPixel. You're going to enjoy this launch. All right, guys, so if you've watched our show for any length of time, you know that we really like KH.com. They're a sponsor of our show, and we appreciate them sponsoring today's video. It's a great place to go if you're looking for used gear, new gear, accessories, lighting. I mean, really, it runs the gamut. You can get anything you need at KH.com. I love the fact that if I'm going to trade in used gear, there's no guesswork, there's no hassling, everything's fair, everything's up front. I just state an online quote of the condition of my gear, what I want to sell, what accessories come with it, and they're going to be an online quote right away. I also like that if I trade in used gear, I get that fair price, and if I use KH's Better Trade program to get something else on the website that'll be new to me, I actually get a 5% benefit on that. Makes my dollar go just a little bit further, so I appreciate that. For this and so many other reasons, KH is PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. I definitely think you should check them out. So, Jordan and I have been to San Francisco a few times. We've never actually come to some of the more iconic areas. So, we find ourselves in the Castro, classic neighborhood. I definitely want to check this out. And just to mention, yes, we are here in San Francisco for the Galaxy Unpacked event. Samsung did fly Jordan out anyways, put him up in a hotel. I flew with the PetaPixel.com membership and the hotel for myself under that. So again, we always appreciate that support. Do consider getting yourself a PetaPixel.com membership. We're on the subject. $3 a month, $30 a year. Look at all the benefits that you get, and it really does help us fund these projects. Anyways, let's get to the sort of construction and build and design of the S26 Ultra and explore this very cool neighborhood. So last year, Jordan and I find ourselves in California for the Samsung 2025 Galaxy Unpacked launch event, and we played with the S25 Ultra. We reviewed that phone, and I mean, I enjoyed my experience with it, but I remember feeling like it's very similar to what we saw before. I even said, if you have an S24 Ultra, there's not really much reason to update right now. Now here we are back in California, 2026 for the latest Unpacked launch event. And with the S26 Ultra, at least on paper, I'm concerned because I feel like in a lot of ways, it's very similar to what came before. I mean, Samsung is, yes, going even deeper into AI, absolutely. Do we have any major hardware changes? We've basically got the exact same sensors across all the cameras on this phone, but there are some hardware changes I would talk about. We do now have the new Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 processor, and Samsung has updated their AP to a second generation. What are we going to see different? Well, I'm still left with the feeling Samsung is a very conservative company, especially when it comes to the actual design of their phones, what they're trying to do with that. Okay, let's talk about cameras, and this is where we're actually seeing some exciting hardware changes. Okay, so the main camera on this, it's still the exact same Type 1/1.3 200 megapixel sensor, which is an excellent sensor. I mean, I like the detail that you get out of that, but we have a big improvement in light gathering. So the old aperture of the lens was f1.7, we're now going to f1.4, and that is substantially brighter. I'm going to definitely see if I'm going to get more shallow depth of field with this now, but also, of course, low light photography is going to be better because of this, so that is a big change. We also get a substantial improvement in light gathering with the 5x telephoto camera here. So again, it's the same sensor as I said before. It's that Type 1/1.252 50 megapixel sensor, but we're now going from a fairly slow f3.4 to a faster f2.9. This is nice, actually. Like, the ultra-wide camera on this was updated with the last version. It's the exact same here going across. There's no change to the ultra-wide camera. Same sensor, same lens before, but it does give you fantastic close-up capabilities. Okay, so this shot brings up a point that I want to get across, because I often find with a smartphone, I really like having sort of like a 2x or 3x camera. And what a lot of manufacturers do is they just digitally interpolate that. You know, they'll have their main camera, usually it's 50 megapixels, and then they'll make like a lower resolution cropped in 2x or 3x digital camera. And that's not an ideal solution. So you got to give kudos to Samsung, because they at least give us a proper 3x camera. But unfortunately, it's the same anemic camera that we had in the S25 Ultra. So we're looking at a relatively small type 1/3.5 sensor, 10 megapixels, f2.4 aperture. So it's not high resolution, it's not a large sensor, and it's not a bright lens, unfortunately. And I wish that, you know, they'd maybe dedicate this sort of 2x or 3x to having an even better camera available. But anyways, I like the frame. All right, let's talk about the last camera, the selfie camera. This is the exact same hardware. This hasn't changed since we saw it last time either. So do keep that in mind. It's going to give you the same results. However, and this is global, what Samsung has changed on the S26 Ultra is now they're incorporating new AI processing for low light photography. And this is intended to look at noise patterns specific to each camera and then be able to correct for those. It should give us better low light performance, but that's something to test quite a bit more in depth here shortly.
Shake 'em up, yeah, you got it. Kiss it for luck and throw it like you want it. I'm talking 7-Eleven, 7-Eleven, I'm on a run that Vegas never seen before. So why run for the door? Baby, let the good times roll.
Okay, so in stark contrast to where we were with the Castro, now we are in the financial district in the Soma area, you know, close to South Beach, and it's just going to give us an opportunity to shoot some low light stuff, that kind of thing. So there's more to talk about. You know, I really want to put cameras first in this particular video, but I think we should get to the actual construction of the phone now. So the S26 Ultra is Samsung's lightest phone yet to date. They've still got the same rounded corners that we had before, although they've now added this to the base model and the Plus model of the phone as well. That's interesting. And here's another thing. So I feel like the last generation of smartphones, the big thing was titanium construction, you know, very lightweight, very strong, absolutely. And then everybody went away from that, I think because of heat dissipation issues. Apple, the iPhone 17, they went back to an aluminum body, and Samsung's done the same thing here. No more titanium construction. It's a new aluminum frame. They've modified the vapor chamber again, so they're really, I think, trying to struggle against heat problems, overheating, and aluminum is just a better material for that. So not only is this Samsung's thinnest Ultra phone ever, but it's also incredibly lightweight, 214 grams, very easy to carry around all day. The front of the screen is protected by Corning Gorilla Glass 2. We see the return of that as well, and it's a nice rugged protection for it. I am not planning on testing that out, nor have I dropped it yet. I'm sure it will happen. While we're on the topic of the screen, 6.9-inch display that we've seen before. This is their 2600 nits max peak brightness AMOLED display. And it's fine. I mean, I do feel though that that's kind of falling behind now, because a lot of other phones that I've used recently have gone even higher, 3500 nits, for example, of peak maximum brightness. I'd like to see that higher as well. Okay, so maybe we don't have an updated display, but we do have very interesting technological improvement. Samsung is now using this new privacy display feature in this phone, and it's very interesting that out of all of the stuff that they talked about at the launch event, it was this feature that got by far the most fanfare. So this is a pretty simple concept to understand. The basic idea is that if you feel you want more privacy on your screen, you can turn this function on. And what will happen is, if you're looking directly at the screen, you can see quite clearly with just a minimum loss of brightness. But if you're off at even a slight angle from that central position, basically you're going to get a black screen. The idea being that if you got people sitting beside you or something like that, like let's say you're on a train or a bus or something, or just sitting down on a bench and you're looking at important documents or bank statements or things like that, they won't be able to see that information, right? You can also customize this very clearly on how you want it to work. So, for example, you can customize it to be triggered by certain notifications, for example, or again, certain apps that you might want to use, certain documents that might come up. So you can really customize how this privacy display works, as well as for horizontal and vertical orientation. And I don't know, I guess if you want to be a gooner on Instagram or something like this, you're really going to like this, or if you're looking through a lot of sensitive work documents, you're going to like this, but it was just so interesting that by far, this is what most people are excited about. Okay, let's talk about battery life. Now we're still looking at 5,000 milliamp hours. This is the exact same as the previous phone. You know, it's the same as the Apple iPhone 17. Like, we're not going to see much improvement, but the new processing engine, the Snapdragon 8 Elite 5th gen processor, will be a little bit more power efficient, so you should get a little bit more battery life, but I think we're going to have very similar results to what we had before. There is also an improvement to the charging of the S26 Ultra. So now what we have is 60 watts of wired charging. That brings it more in line with its contemporaries. You know, you can charge like 75% in about half an hour. We also have improvements to the wireless charging, 25 watts of wireless charging, but remember that the Galaxy S26 Ultra still does not have any sort of magnets incorporated into the phone. There's no MagSafe or anything like that, so you'd have to get a case that incorporates that. This is it. I like my composition. Bam, I'm gonna shoot there on the main camera. Let's get in here. We got a single slice of pizza. I think it'd be more appetizing if we had the whole damn thing. So, make this pizza a whole pizza. What's thinking? You know, the generation, even with the new processor, still takes a little bit of time. It's not instantaneous, you gotta wait, but look at that. Wow, we got ourselves a whole pizza, oh my God. So there you go. And this is actually one of the big emphasis for this like AI generation on the new phone. They're really pushing clothing, fashion stuff, food apparently, but yeah, that's far more appetizing. If you came across this pizza, you'd probably take a bite. Well, Jordan, maybe we should eat here. I might get a discount because this is my last name, Matsuyama. That's the kanji for my last name, Pine Mountain. So I do not own this restaurant. I just want to make that very clear.
I thought your last name was Nichols.
Technically, if you follow the patriarchy. All right, it's the next day. We have ourselves a classic San Francisco foggy morning here. We find ourselves in Nihonmachi. I've never been here to Japantown before in San Francisco, so we're gonna check it out. But also, I think today I'm really gonna talk about AI and the AI features on this phone, because look, Samsung and Google absolutely have a strong partnership when it comes to pushing forth AI, generative AI, and how that can work for their photos. And I would argue that Samsung even take it further, and so we have to address it, we have to talk about it. And I want to talk about the AI that we're first getting here that we've seen for many, many years on many other manufacturers' phones as well. Things like noise reduction, things like portrait mode. Let's get into that. I was curious to look at noise reduction first here on the S26 Ultra because Samsung's doing something a bit different with this phone. They are actually applying a new kind of AI-based noise reduction that specifically looks at the noise patterns you will get out of each individual camera and lens. It's hard to say whether it's working or not because the fact of the matter is Samsung's noise reduction, like many other smartphone manufacturers, still tends to be a little heavy-handed and a little over-processed looking, which results in smushy detail. And also, because we now get that better aperture in the main camera and the telephoto, it makes me shoot those a lot more in low light because that 3x camera, which is in a lot of cases the right focal length that I want to shoot, in low light, that sensor and that slow aperture just do not do a good job. You just can't beat the physics of that, and so it looks awful with that lens. So we're standing here under Sutter Street, so why don't we talk about shutter speed, right? Seems like a good time for it. Because there was classically an issue with Samsung phones. When you're in pro mode, you can set whatever minimum shutter speed you want, that's fine. But when you're in auto mode, it would often default to a slower shutter speed, like 1/30th or something like that. And that's because we have things like image stabilization, computational photography. You can usually handhold shots, no problem, but when it comes to like pets or kids, action and stuff like that, it would often cause problems. So now there's a really nice feature on the S26 Ultra. I can use the photo assistant app and actually force a minimum shutter speed. So I can set 1/20th of a second and it won't go below that. It'll instead raise the ISO higher when it needs to. Again, this is just for auto mode and it only works when you're shooting in 12 megapixels. Don't ask me why. So let's start off talking about some of the basic AI tools that we have seen before on a lot of other phones. So first off, portrait mode. I liked what S25 Ultra did with portrait modes, good depth maps, and here it seems to be refined, continuing in a really nice way. You can see that even flyaway hairs on my head are still being maintained. I like that realism, and we're getting natural depth maps. The shoulder falls off properly, and you can go from very natural looking to extremely soft bokeh if you want to. But overall, I think it's doing a really good job. The other thing I'll notice is without any sort of artificial blur applied, you can see with the 5x lens, that wider aperture is giving us like a fairly shallow depth of field. It's still a phone. We got to keep context, but at least it's not completely sharp in focus. Now you do also have some other handy tools we've seen before. I mean, things like removing shadows that might be distracting or removing unwanted reflections in glass and stuff. And it works about the same as what we've seen before. It does an okay job, doesn't always get rid of all the reflections. But when you want to go further, well, then you click those little galaxy stars, and this is where the AI hits the fan. And before we get into this, I really want to give this a measured approach. I think there's a lot of truths that we definitely want to discuss when we get into AI. And I mean, look, the first truth that really I think Samsung goes hard into the paint on AI. Absolutely. Everybody's going to have to make some sort of decision on what AI is useful to them, what AI they can do without, and how far they really want to push it. And that spectrum, it's really going to depend on you and how you like to work and what you're willing to be okay with. And so I'm not going to really judge that. I do feel, though, like a phone like this brings up some interesting questions because on the one hand, there's some very legitimate, useful AI stuff that I think belongs in a phone. And this is a lot of quality of life stuff. I mean, Samsung has this feature where you can take a picture of a document and it can get rid of the coffee stains on the document and undo the wrinkles and stuff and save it as a PDF before you send it off. I could see that being very, very useful, things like annotating your email, screening your phone calls, making notes and suggestions based on what you're looking at, what your history is, all that kind of stuff. I think that can all be very useful and you can decide how that fits into your lifestyle. But then on the other hand, when it comes to photography, of course, AI is legitimately scary and rightfully so. And this phone does continue to illustrate a big part of why that is. But at the same time, as a photographer, there are AI tools that I use regularly and I enjoy and I really appreciate. Things like erasure tools. And we use this all the time. Generative erase in Photoshop is a really powerful tool. I know a lot of you out there use it. I use it a lot, to get rid of maybe a corner that's got some vignetting or there's something funky that's just distracting. I mean, I will use that stuff from time to time. On the other hand, do I want to be replacing skies and stuff? No, that's not really my thing. I like to capture photos and leave them as they are. But when we are playing with a phone like this, we have a lot of these tools and it's putting it at the fingertips of everybody, not just people who are skilled with certain photo editing programs, but into the hands of basically everyday people. And so that's both interesting and scary, but let's look at some of the tools that we have here. So once we click that little galaxy set of stars, it's going to bring up your photo and it's going to give you some options. Now, there are some auto-generated options. These aren't always consistent, but sometimes it'll say, the shadow might be distracting, or you might want to get rid of this reflection. And you can do that through this, or you can go through the other menu that we talked about already and try to force it yourself. But otherwise, you're going to have features like the erase tool and the move tool. And these are just going to be getting better and better and better. I would say on the S26 Ultra, I've noticed a huge improvement in the accuracy of selecting objects, erasing them properly. Again, it's not perfect, but it works really well. And you've got tools like moving subjects across the frame, repositioning them, changing them size. This works pretty effectively as well. I would say there's still a bit of a delay, as you can see in the recordings, but it's not bad. It's getting a little bit faster, just that extra processing power. Then you can go even further. We can start to generate stuff. And when we've been playing with this on the previous versions of the Samsung and Google phones that do this, it always felt very hokey. But I will say now, it's just getting better and better. And we know this. We know that it's going to get more and more refined, more and more convincing. And I think this just shows that extra step. It's not there yet, but you can see in a shot like this how it can effectively erase things like lamp posts and light posts right out of the shot. Then I can use generative AI to add it to a different time, make it sunset, put a plane in the background. And you know what? On an Instagram post, it looks pretty convincing. Personally though, this stuff doesn't float my boat. This isn't stuff that I want to do. I don't want to be taking photos and really like changing stuff, even though again, I can, it does a pretty effective job. There are some situations though where I did want to test it out in maybe a more photographic way to change things like color filters or the look. So, you know, you can make things look like sunset, or you can change things to golden hour. And of course you have these preset filters that you can all go through and change. You know, we have those on a lot of cameras as well, but this goes beyond that. And I gotta say, like, putting in the prompts, we're still at a point where sometimes the phone doesn't get it or it doesn't understand. Sometimes it wants it a more simple prompt, sometimes it wants it more complex. You often have to auto-generate quite a few attempts until you get something that you like. So we're still kind of in that phase of just taking stabs at it and experimenting, and that can be fun for a bit, but it also can be a little bit frustrating. But I just want to see, can I do something like add a retro look or change it to sunset? And with varying degrees of success, yes, you can actually do a lot of that stuff. Now, as we've seen before, when you do AI-generated images or do these kind of edits, you'll get a little easily removed watermark at the bottom. And that's fine. I mean, Samsung is a member of the C2PA, but I don't think they're expecting journalists to use these Samsung phones to capture like documentary work where you actually absolutely have to ensure that these are authentic and not AI edited. These are meant for the casual user. These are meant for fun. This is meant for making birthday invitations and custom stickers and making your friend look like they were in an oil painting and stuff. And I'm all for that. It's fun, it's silly, it brings joy. Go for it, right? You're sharing this with friends and family on social media, whatever. But as this gets more and more convincing, we have to keep having this discussion because we are seeing a lot of AI on social media. It is getting harder and harder to tell when it is or is not authentic. So the Samsung S26 Ultra, and I'm sure the new Google phones as well, are going to keep adding to this entire conversation. You might not like the direction that it's going though. And for me, I have a lot of reservations.
All right, it's Jordan to talk about the video capabilities of the S26 Ultra, which Chris is filming me on right now. We're shooting it in log, and I'm gonna make sure that we use all of the different cameras on this while I tell you about some of the video features. So the headline feature on the S26 Ultra for video shooters is the new APV codec. This is Samsung's Advanced Professional Video Codec. But what does it actually do? Well, it's all-eye compression, where it's gonna draw every individual frame. So no matter how much movement's in the shot, the quality isn't gonna drop. As well, all of these types of files are quite a bit easier on your computer to edit. And talking about editing, at this point, these files are only editable with DaVinci Resolve or CapCut. So you're looking at either a very amateurish tool or a very professional tool in order to play with this. Now, the other thing to know about all-eye compression is it takes up an absolutely massive amount of storage. What's nice is this is available in 4K, all your frame rates, and it's available in 8K as well. And because it's going to take up so much space, you're definitely going to want to plug an external hard drive into the phone so you don't immediately fill up your brand new phone almost instantly with a bunch of pro video recording. Now, when they first announced this new codec, my first thought was like, though I like Samsung's log profile, it tends to be very over sharpened. So I was hoping they would scale that back a bit, but you can see looking at the H.265 and the APV footage side by side, they look identical except for the type of compression scheme they're using. The one big benefit I can see is if you use APV, it does lock your frame rate. So you're at a fixed 24 frames, 30, 60 frames per second, so this will sync with multiple devices. But the main takeaway is this is definitely a better recording option technically, but because of the huge storage space it requires and the editing limitations of it, I just don't think it's going to be useful for that many people. And this is the same thing I've said about Apple's ProRes and ProRes RAW implementation in the iPhone. I'd rather just have improved 10-bit recording, something we're not really seeing on the phone this year. Okay, so I'm sure my cameraman Chris Nichols would attest that it's really hard walking sideways on these giant San Francisco hills and keeping the horizon steady. Thankfully, Samsung does have a new technology called Horizon Lock, but we have to stop the recording for Chris to turn it on. So now that we've got this enabled, here's what Horizon Lock will do. Essentially, it will crop into an area where you can rotate the camera 360 degrees, but yet your horizon won't skew in the footage. Now, in order to accomplish this, yes, we need a big crop so you can rotate that 3x4 sensor all the way. So what the camera will do by default is actually jump to your wider camera. So if we're using the 1x, it goes to the ultra wide, then applies a significant crop. As you can imagine, that's going to really degrade the image quality when you do that. As well, this isn't going to be available in high resolution recording or super slow-mo. It's not even available in your advanced pro camera. Now, this is technology that we've seen before. Action cameras have been doing something like this for years now, and it actually makes a lot more sense in those, because an action camera is something that you're going to attach onto like a bike or a snowboard, and then you can have your subject spinning around the camera. It looks really cool and dynamic, where that is certainly possible to do with a smartphone, but for the most part, this camera is going to be held. And I find the Super Steady is actually more than adequate for walking or even running with the camera, where you don't have the horizon skewing crazily all over the place. If you do want to mount this to a device and have it spinning around, it is cool that you've got this mode, but I don't think it's as useful as it is in action cameras. So let's talk about the log footage that comes out of this camera. It is essentially the same as what we saw last year, so it gives you some flexibility in post, though like I said, I find it a little bit over-sharpened. But one of the big usability upgrades this year is you can apply preview LUTs. So you can see what it'll look like with a regular 709 conversion, just give you accurate colors, but you also have some creative LUTs in there as well to kind of give you distinct looks. And it'll give you a description of when it might be the best time to use those particular LUTs. There are some limitations on this though. You can't get LUT preview if you're shooting high speed 4K 120 or in any of the 8K modes. It's probably just a little bit too demanding on the processor. As well, this suffers from a problem I see constantly on Android phones, where when you apply the LUT, you do get a histogram on this, but it'll expand, meaning that it looks like you suddenly have less dynamic range. It's just giving you a histogram for the LUT that you've applied, not the actual log footage you're recording. So you have more dynamic range than the histogram is indicating. It's counterintuitive, and it really should be fixed by this point. Chris, I'm sorry you got to shoot me on the 3x. I mean, this is definitely the standout older camera on this. It really does look like smartphone footage from 5 years ago. But anyway, let's talk about the actual quality of the footage. And Samsung's doing something pretty interesting here. So previously, they've just applied the same type of noise reduction to all the different cameras on the phone. What they're doing this time is they have a separate algorithm, which of course is based in AI, as all things must be these days, where it's got an individual profile for every one of the cameras, which will hopefully give you a much more consistent look going from camera to camera, but it's also going to reduce the noise. And looking at basically all of the smaller cameras, the ultra wide, the 3x and the 5x, it might be a little bit better in low light, but it's certainly not a dramatic improvement. It still very much looks like smartphone footage. What I can say is the main camera is fantastic in extreme low light, maybe partially due to that brighter 1.4 sensor or these algorithms. It does give you just a very natural big camera look to the image, and I would actually take this thing out when the lights go down, something I'd say about almost no other smartphone cameras. So of the major new features that we see on this phone, it might seem like a bit of a letdown, but let's remember when we did our ranking last year, I said this is my favorite series of Android phone for shooting videos, and so much of that still holds true. I love the fact that this can record native 8K video, and you can see in this clip here, there is a real resolution advantage to shooting in that 8K mode. And unlike the Google Pixel, it's doing this all on device. I don't have to upload to the cloud in order to up-res or anything like that. So Samsung, I really like your phone for video. If you want to totally win me over, just let me adjust the level of sharpening in your own log recording and give me like a really good 3x lens. It's the one camera that sets this apart from a lot of the other smartphones in the North American market. I want it to be good, and currently it's bad.
Wow, what a beautiful day and a beautiful place as the sun goes down to end our trip here in San Francisco. We had a wonderful time, as we always do. Sadly, it is time to say goodbye. We're flying out tomorrow morning back home to Calgary. But it's not the end of our video because we still have quite a bit to look at. I want to get these files home. I really want to analyze them and then really see if the image quality has changed significantly from what we've seen before, and we'll wrap things up. All right, so we're back in Calgary. I've downloaded the photos. I've had a chance to process the RAWs, both the Pro RAW and the Expert RAW, and we talked about both of those. But the first thing I really want to get across about Samsung phones is this. If you're shooting them just in a strictly point and shoot mode, which is how a lot of users are going to use them, you're going to shoot JPEGs, you're just going to throw them on social media. It's a very simple and very good experience. I mean, I like the color you get out of Samsung. Their white balance is very neutral. San Francisco, we had mostly cloudy weather, so you get a very neutral, slightly cold tone. That's totally appropriate. Of course, I can change that with profiles and stuff like that. But it's when you want to go deeper into using these phones, like more manual control, different resolutions, the 2 different RAW files that you have, whether it's a Pro RAW mode or using the Expert RAW module. I've complained about this before on the Samsung phones. It can get a little bit complicated. It can be overwhelming. And if it's overwhelming for me, somebody who does this for a living and who also has used many of these phones, it'll probably be overwhelming for you at home as well. Like, there's just so many different resolutions you can choose and rules on when you can and can't do that. And what are the differences between the RAW files and stuff. I'm going to try to explain some of that, but there's a lot to it, and I feel like it is overly complicated, to be fair, on Samsung phones. But let's get into Pro RAW first, and then we'll talk about Expert RAW as well. So first, when you use the Pro mode on the phone, this does unlock all your manual controls, which is great. Change ISO, change white balance, change your, your shutter speeds. That's all cool, and you can do some creative stuff there. Also, you can shoot the Pro RAW mode. The key thing to remember, though, about the Pro RAW mode is this is not an amalgamation of stacked photos like you would get out of the JPEGs or out of the Expert RAW, and that really is the big difference there. The Pro RAW is basically just like a single file out of the camera as a DNG. Because of that, you don't get much dynamic range. But I will say this, no phone really gets great dynamic range, but I would say if you look across all the brands, Samsung do tend to be a little bit on the higher end of dynamic range. They give you fairly good highlight retention, the ability to push shadows, but the basic RAW mode, you get a lot of noise. I mean, even in bright sunlight, if I'm boosting shadows, I'm usually going to do some noise reduction in post. And certainly any low light stuff, I am doing heavy noise reduction to control it because it's pretty apparent. Otherwise, I'm happy with the ability to change color if I want and change white balance in post. That all works really well. You do have the option in the Pro RAW mode of doing 12 megapixel or 50 megapixel files. I would probably just shoot 50 megapixel files, but honestly, I didn't really see much difference in detail or noise reduction, regardless of those 2 resolutions. There wasn't really much difference there, as you can see. So overall, it's a fun mode, but it's really Expert RAW mode, the separate module that's going to get you far more control. So if you really want to push files, well, let's talk about that next. So when we go into Expert RAW mode, we're now amalgamating multiple images stacked together, and you can see first off, this is going to give us big dynamic range benefits. We're going to get way better highlight retention. I mean, here I did an example where I took a very contrasty scene. I overexposed both the regular RAW mode and the Expert RAW mode by a stop, and you can see that the sky comes back way better on the Expert RAW shot. Then I also wanted to do a side-by-side comparison where they're at proper exposures, and both do a pretty good job, but you will notice the Expert RAW mode has just more subtlety in the tones, a little bit richer color overall, and less noise. I mean, that's a big thing. Where the Pro RAW needs noise reduction in post, the Expert RAW really doesn't. It does tend to look maybe a little bit processed, a little bit softer. It's kind of like a mix between a JPEG and a RAW in the way it looks out of Samsung, but I do find that it has nicer tone, even better detail when you zoom in here, whereas the basic Pro RAW can look a little bit wormy. But the resolution that you choose in Expert RAW also has a fairly big impact on your photography. So first off, let's just talk about good lighting situations. If I'm using the main camera, for example, I can push up to 200 megapixels. And just like we saw before, you can see here there's a little bit better detail. Overall the tonal range is about the same, but there's just a little bit more realistic rendering to the actual detail. It does help. It's not anywhere close to like what a 200 megapixel file out of a large sensor would be. Make no mistake. But there is an improvement there. But the scope for that is pretty limited. When you go into low light situations, this is where resolution really matters. You can see here that even in Expert RAW mode, if I shoot at 50 megapixels, the low light performance tends to look kind of rough. There's like weird halos and I'm getting a lot of noise and stuff like that. There is the option to shoot 24 megapixels when you do the Expert RAW, and I really like that. When I reduce to 24 megapixels and I get some pixel binning there, the low light performance just gets better. We can see good detail here, good clarity in the low light areas. Look at that compared to the regular RAW mode at 50 megapixels. You can see that although I've reduced the noise there pretty effectively, we're losing a lot of detail. Like the writing in the bottles here is really hard to see. Whereas that 24 megapixel expert RAW photo, that probably gave me the best results in low light situations if I'm shooting like, RAW format. I honestly wish I shot a lot more of my photos knowing that in 24 megapixel mode in the expert RAW. It is also important to point out, you can now do that 24 megapixels, as I said, when you're shooting JPEGs in the auto photo mode, but you still don't get the 24 megapixel option when you're shooting the Pro RAW format. Now, while we're on the topic of low light photography, again, smartphones, this is not their strength. You can only do so much with processing and stacking, but let's talk about it. I am certainly noticing some improvement with the main camera and the telephoto camera thanks to that wider aperture. I think that's great to have, but you are still going to get that variety. As you change between cameras, your image quality is going to change quite dramatically. I mean, here, an ultra wide shot in expert RAW in a low light situation. Yeah, I can do some processing. I'm still going to lose detail though, because it's just a small camera with a fairly slow aperture. And that's the same thing we saw in the S25 Ultra because it's the same camera. And so yeah, if you're willing to do the work, shoot 24 megapixel expert RAW, do some processing yourself, you can get some pretty good results out there. Or honestly, shoot the camera in automatic mode using the nightography, the night mode in the phone, because it actually does a really good job with just out of camera JPEGs in night mode, as you can see here. I mean, obviously this is what Samsung's trying to do. They're trying to make it simple for people using this at home who aren't going to go down the whole route of processing their files. And the night mode gives me good detail, reduces noise effectively. I really like the result right out of camera. In the end, whenever I play with Samsung Galaxy phones, I'm always left with the same impression. They do tend to look a little bit over-processed, absolutely. You certainly notice that quite a bit. But at the same time, I do tend to like the color, the overall tone. At least it's a very general purpose kind of thing that'll appeal to a very broad audience. For people that want to get more in-depth with the camera, you absolutely have that room. Again, I might feel it's a little bit overcomplicated, but you can shoot in expert RAW, which I highly recommend. And then it does give you that flexibility if you know what you're doing to get good low light photography out of it, nice dynamic range overall, and have a lot of room to push and pull your image quality. So as complicated as the system is, I do feel like the Samsung phones do provide for every kind of photographer. So inevitably when we come to the end of these reviews, it comes always down to how much has this phone changed from last year's model. And of course, everything now is fairly incremental, but I gotta give credit to the S26 Ultra. We do have some notable improvements here that do set it apart from the S25 Ultra. And I mean, look, first off, when it comes to AI, there's all the quality of life improvement stuff, the document scanning and the nudge formats and, compiling all your emails. I mean, that's beyond the scope, but even things like privacy screen, people are gonna really love that. Like, there's a lot of good quality of life improvements here to enjoy. And when it comes to the photography side, having significant aperture enhancements when it comes to the main camera and the telephoto, that is an important hardware change. And it does absolutely make a difference when it comes to shallower depth of field, for example, and better low light performance. That being said, the photographic aspect of this phone is a very familiar experience to what you'll get in the S25 Ultra. Image quality is improved, as I mentioned, but it's still fairly similar. And how you handle the RAW formats, how you have to process your images, the overall look of the images seems to be very similar to what we saw before. So the real difference that I'm noticing here is the generative AI. And like it or not, it is a huge aspect of this phone. I mean, I gotta say, the generative AI aspects of this are far more realistic than what I saw last year. You can have some creative fun with it, and it's only gonna get better and better and better. And if you are going to use these features and play with them, I honestly think you'll find it a better experience than last year. It is just a little bit faster. It makes less mistakes. I mean, there are still errors all the time or prompts that don't go through properly, but it was less frustrating than the experience I had with the S25 Ultra, and the results can be fun. I can see how a lot of people will genuinely want to use these just for fun posts or making their own stickers and stuff, and that's totally cool. As far as photography, I don't know, we're going to have to see how this goes in the future, but Samsung is absolutely going in this direction whether we like it or not. I absolutely guarantee that the S26 Ultra is going to spur some conversation, so you know where to put those comments right below. We appreciate the feedback, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of opinions going back and forth on this. I've already talked about the PetaPixel.com memberships. We love your support there, but also check out the PetaPixel podcast. We talk a lot about the phones in depth on the podcast as well. We want to see you guys there. It's easy. This exact same channel, or you can listen to it on all your favorite podcasting apps. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.